Hello and welcome to Organizational Leadership 3000 Learning Module 2, the reflective seminar for 1 credit hour subtitled Self as Learner. Remember that during organizational leadership courses like this one, there are certain learning outcomes that you should be aware of. Make sure that you're planning on describing your past experiences that involved learning. Analyze your past events and think about the personal feelings that you had about those events while they were happening. Be sure that you can summarize the actions and feelings that were a part of your past learning process. Make sure that you're prepared to record those events in good written work. And then discuss situations using the conceptual frameworks for reflection. Those conceptual frameworks for reflection are coming from the literature that we are looking at during the course. There's actually a really interesting academic literature out there about reflective learning and how to structure a reflective experience, and that's what we're looking at during our course. When you see these particular individuals' names, they're going to be coming back up during the other sections of the class, during the other learning modules, and you want to make sure that when you are doing your written work, you're referring back to their particular models of reflective learning. In general, each of these individuals has come up with a theory of reflective learning that involves certain phases that you go through. Very often it's a 3-phase process. So as you are writing about your learning experiences, be aware of which section of Courthagen and Vesalius you are discussing, or which section of Fiedler and Marino you're discussing. When you're thinking about doing your discussion assignments for this particular course, make sure that you are keeping these particular learning outcomes in mind. And as you are doing your discussion postings, always try to refer back to those individuals who we've discussed. In Learning Module 1, we introduced the story of David Kolb going to the Automobile Museum. And during this learning module, we're going to be enriching that with some work by Morris Fiedler and Catherine Marino, where they will discuss certain ideas about how we end up having a reflective learning process and how we become aware of the feelings that we have while we are learning. So take a look at this paragraph and try and ask yourself some of these questions to reflect on your learning experience. When you are learning something new, where are you at the beginning of that process? What assumptions and feelings do you have that may already be shaping how you learn? Do you end up focusing on the right things, or do you have, the potential for feelings and assumptions to limit how you're learning? Are you hoping to see examples that fit with what you already think? Sort of like David Kolb when he first goes into the Automobile Museum, are you kind of looking for examples that fit with what you already thought? Or are you willing to assimilate and deal with examples that may not fit into your already preconceived ideas? Here's a table that describes this process of reflection. This is a table from Fiedler and Marino, and as you look at the table, the aspects of reflection side, where we look at those sample questions, are really important to consider as you are writing up those experiences. Because remember that for our class, you're having to look back at a learning experience that you had in the past. Try and think about these questions. What was salient in the event? What was important? What was your focus? What would interest you in that event? What kinds of things would inspire your curiosity? And what kinds of emotions and feelings did you have? Those are the kinds of processes of reflection that you have to think about. So as you're dealing with new learning, you want to think about yourself as going through a process. This is a flowchart diagram that Fiedler and Marino used to describe how this process of reflective learning can go. As you look at it, start out at the top left side with that word events. There are certain events that we have in life, and then they are going to end up becoming an experience. The experience that you have is going to be shaped by the forms of attention that you have. So the attention that you end up giving, what you're paying attention to, shapes the experience for you. It's not like you're always having the same experience as somebody else. There's always some assumptions and beliefs that go into how you experience the world. And then after you have that experience, you reflect on it. You try and think about it. You consider what were the influences that made it become what it was, and could it have been different? How could it have been better? So the idea here is that meaningful learning is something that comes from not just having an event and an experience. You also have to reflect on that experience to be able to have meaningful learning. So keep this particular visual diagram in mind as you're writing up your experiences. Think about that as a way of shaping how you discuss previous learning. And let's go ahead and make sure that we see that in light of Kolb. When Kolb goes to the Automobile Museum, his attention is getting pulled in certain ways, and the ways that his attention gets pulled will shape his experience. Later on, he reflects on it, and that's when he comes up with the idea of how he's able to assimilate and use convergence learning to be able to converge his definition of automobile with all the other different examples of automobiles that he saw while he was there. So you're looking at this phased process, and reflecting on your prior learning is a very important, significant part of the process. That's why in organizational leadership we have reflective seminars like these, to give you a chance to really think deeply about previous learning that you had on the job or in community service, for example. Here's Kolb's diagram for different levels of self-reflection and understanding. When you're looking at this particular diagram, think about it as a diagram where you are making progress from the bottom to the top of the diagram. So the arrow that you see on the left side is the progression that you go through over the course of learning. For Organizational Leadership 3000, we're really focused on the bottom third of the diagram, the acquisition phase. So you're acquiring knowledge in the first place, you're acquisitioning knowledge. And then you have the self as an undifferentiated being who is immersed in the world. You're learning about the world around you. And that may mean that you have certain assumptions and beliefs and feelings that actually will affect what you can bring into your knowledge. So this is another diagram that just gives you a sense of how the progress works. In David Kolb's writing, he also has another diagram. This diagram works from the top to the bottom. So where you see that arrow down at the bottom, that's the last particular session. When you're looking at Organizational Leadership 3000, we're starting up at the top. So you're considering a focal experience that you've had, and then you think about that idea of learning by convergence, being able to use new definitions or expand your conceptual scheme from what you had before, and assimilating new kinds of knowledge, thinking about the meaning of what you've learned, thinking about it in terms of a deeper analysis, really reflecting on it. Now this is a really detailed table that Kolb has in his writing to explain the idea of experiential learning. But if you look really closely at it, you'll see some terms that are now already familiar to you. In Organizational Leadership 3000, you want to picture yourself as dealing with the part of the table that's headed with acquisition, up at the top, the second column. So when you're looking at the idea of learning by acquisition, you're doing a way of looking at the world, but then you have to stop and reflect and see how your beliefs and assumptions and opinions may actually set certain parameters on how you learn. And you're asking yourself the question, well, how could this have been dealt with differently? You're reflecting on your past experience and doing a little bit of self-critique, looking at yourself as a learner. So, in the discussion for this particular learning module, make sure that you try to answer this list of questions in your discussion. Part of the idea of calling it discussion, posting, and responses is that we just want to reinforce that when you make your own first posting, you should be referring to the theories that we've looked at. So you should be referring to people like Kolb and Fiedler and Marino when you're writing up your discussion posting. And then you want to make sure that you are replying to other people. You're responding to other students in the class. So it should be the kind of thing where everybody is seeing each other do this kind of reflective learning model, and then you're actually giving each other feedback on how it ends up working. You can ask each other questions and try to draw out different things that other people may not have realized. So if you're describing a particular event where you learned something new, somebody may end up asking you, oh, well, was there somebody else around who had given you some ideas about this before? So it's discussion, posting, and responses, and you're analyzing a previous experience when you learned something new. I think it'll be a lot of fun. You'll get a lot of time to be able to post and discuss with other students in the class, and you'll really get to know each other. So once again, thanks for listening. Learning Module 2, Organizational Leadership 3000. Take care.